Hi, and welcome back to Political Science 101. We're on Chapter 2, which is the Constitution, and we are finishing up the chapter. We're talking about the Articles of Confederation. A confederation, the definition is a loose association of independent states. This week you're going to read the Articles of Confederation, and it was the government that was in place for 10 years, but it was very weak. In your reading, it talks about how weak it was, and who had sovereignty. The articles in the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation proved to be a good first draft of the Constitution. It just was not enough. It needed a second draft. The Revolutionary War ended in October 18th, 1781, with the Treaty of Paris, and the Articles of Confederation were adopted in 1777. We are one nation today and 13 tomorrow. Who will treat with us on such terms? So they needed that confederation. Then you have Shays' Rebellion comes on the scene, where some angry farmers get together and they see a courthouse and some arms, and George Washington goes in and says this, cannot happen. Although he's a reasonable man, absolutely not. At the top of page 34, there is a table that's really very helpful. The government's lack of certain powers under the Articles of Confederation taught the framers of the Constitution several important lessons. So it was kind of like a trial run, and they learned from it. What the Congress could not do. Congress could not force the states to meet military quotas. Congress could not regulate commerce between the states and with other nations. Congress could not enter into treaties. Could enter into treaties, but couldn't enforce them in any way. So just no power behind what they signed. Congress could not directly tax the people. Congress had no power to enforce its laws. Any amendments to the articles required all 13 states' consent. There was no national judicial system, and there was no executive branch. Okay, so there were quite a few results that were huge problems, and that's why they needed to be changed within 10 years. The central government could not draft soldiers. Each state was free to tax goods imported from other states. So you'd have greedy states and issues there. The states were not forced to respect treaties. The central government had to rely on the states to collect taxes, which the states were reluctant to do. Central government depended on the states to enforce laws, and they rarely did. In practice, the powers of the central government could not be changed. Most disputes among the states could not be settled by the central government. Someone needed to be the one that could settle them. And coordinating the work of the central government was almost impossible. So it was just entirely too weak, and a new system needed to be adopted. So there was a meeting in Annapolis. Alexander Hamilton was there of New York, James Madison of Virginia. Both of these men were very much in favor of a strong central government. And then they called a bigger convention in Philadelphia the next year. Okay, who were the delegates? Nice list for you on page 35. Alexander Hamilton, George Washington was president, James Madison, George Mason, Robert Morris, Benjamin Franklin. Very interesting, he was 81. Other leaders that were absent were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and you'll find that these are kind of the anti-federalists. They weren't there at that first meeting at this convention, and maybe they wouldn't have had such disagreements had they been. Many of the delegates were elitists, and that was sort of a problem and a distrust. So James Madison had spent months reviewing European political theory before he went to Philadelphia, and he came up with the Virginia Plan, which was a wonderful plan for the larger states. Because what it said was the larger the state, the more representatives. But the only problem was this did not give equal representation to the smaller states. So Virginia liked it very much because it had lots of people, but New Jersey did not. So then someone else, William Patterson of New Jersey, presented another plan, and an alternative plan for smaller states, and it said 2 representatives from each state, period. So what they do is they put them together in a compromise, and politics actually works as it's supposed to, like a well-oiled machine. And the Great Compromise came down, and it was Roger Sherman's plan to have the Great Compromise, having a lower chamber, the House of Representatives, which was determined by the number of people in the state, and then the Senate, which is just 2 per state, no exceptions. Then you have the 3/5 compromise, which this is really sad. This is where we get into history that is contradictory. Because you're saying, you know, this is for freedom, everyone needs a voice, all humans are created equal, and then you decide that a slave is 3/5 of a person, and the word slave does not enter into any of these agreements. It just says other persons, and it's very hypocritical, and we need to make sure that that's a lens that we look through now. Is everyone being treated the same? Does everyone have the same rights? And it is really important, because this compromise says that, you know, people of color, the black slaves were 3/5 of a person, and that is just a huge problem. And it was eventually overturned, this 3/5 compromise, in 1868 by the 14th Amendment. Okay, slave importation. It did satisfy for the Constitutional Convention, this 3/5 compromise. Many delegates wanted slavery to be banned right then at the beginning of our country, but doing so, the southern states would never have ratified. Their sole economy and their wealth was tied to slavery, especially since the cotton gin came out. Cotton is extremely difficult to harvest, and then when Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, price of cotton went up because it was more quickly turned over to be able to be sold, and no one wanted to do this work. This was horrible work. It was brutal work. And so you have free labor in the South with slavery. You have cheap labor in the North, which would be your immigrants, but they still were being paid. Still not treated well, and not, and more abused and used, but still free, and still considered a whole person, which is so hypocritical. Defining the executive and judiciary branches, you have, you know, the office of president is introduced, and there is, you know, and for the judicial system, if there is a Supreme Court justice that needs to be impeached because of improper behavior, they can be. And if there's a president that has improper behavior, he also can be impeached. Okay. The articles were agreed to. You know, there was a lot of contradictions of, you know, a lot of people wanted to ban slavery, but they just didn't feel like they could put the Union and join them together. So they decided to make a leeway to continue slavery. But it was a betrayal of the Declaration of Independence, where it says all men are created equal. Okay, debate over ratification. We have the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Make sure you watch the videos on Crash Course Government and Politics. It really explains it in detail. Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists is those who favor a strong central government. Anti-Federalists are those who are opposed to a strong central government. Okay. Most of the Federalists, and I believe I just mentioned this, attended the convention, Constitutional Convention, and the Anti-Federalists were ones that were not there. So right off the bat, they didn't have any knowledge, and they were skeptical, and it kind of led to more infighting. Then you have the Federalist Papers that were published trying to get them to, the different states to ratify the Articles of Confederation. Federalist Papers, many of them were written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, who was a Supreme Court Justice later on, and James Madison. Okay. All right. Many anti-federalists really wanted to have a Bill of Rights, which gave the individual rights to each citizen. And you have to understand who are citizens. White males that own property. Women aren't really considered citizens. They're really property of their husbands or under the control of their fathers. Indians, Native Americans are not considered to be citizens, even though they owned the land prior, which that also is very contradictory, as well as Black slaves. So, you're talking about a Bill of Rights for who? Who has rights? Only a very, very small faction of people. Okay, ratification came. Federalists finally won in all the state conventions, and they slowly ratified, and Rhode Island did not ratify until the very last, which was 1790. Okay. Slaves, women, and Indians, of course, did not vote, and that's mentioned there as well. Not included. All right. Articles 1, 2, and 3 indicate exactly what national government can do. The first 9 amendments to the Constitution list the ways to which the government cannot limit certain individual freedoms. And again, individual freedoms is new. All right. It's not something that's always been in world history. They talk more about the Constitution, but the Magna Carta was one of the first constitutions, and that was kind of modeled after the Constitution in America was kind of modeled after that. And it really, what a constitution is saying no one is above the law. President, anybody. That's why the impeachment process was put in place. That's why, for judges, Supreme Court judges, they can't get away with whatever they can get away with. Everyone is under the law in some form. Okay. Federalism, or a federal system of government, is, and that's the next chapter that we'll be talking about, but that is a shared powers between the state government and the national government, and having, those shared powers and having that balance. We have checks and balances, separation of powers, how to control itself, veto powers, and you can see the nice graph on page 43, how that all balances out. James Madison, contributions at the Constitutional Convention earned him the title Master Builder of the Constitution. Why might that have been the one chosen? He was the one chosen to draft the Bill of Rights. Very interesting. Okay. Talks about parliaments, the Bill of Rights, amending the Constitution. Very difficult, but can be done. Methods of proposing an amendment, methods of ratifying an amendment. Okay. All right, and make sure you study carefully for your quiz. And that is all for Chapter 2, the Constitution. Thank you very much.